This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and today is my special guest here. We have two-time UFC tournament winner, former Vale Tudo champion of the world, former Pride fighter, star of The Smashing Machine, and supposedly star of a new movie where The Rock is actually going to play him. Mark Kerr, The Smashing Machine himself. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, man. I definitely appreciate you having me on, and I know it's taken a little bit of coordination to get us together on but I'm glad that we're here, man. I think I'll enjoy this.
You're still keeping yourself pretty busy these days. What are you doing these days?
Yeah, you know what? I got into right now. I'm trying to. It's more of a volunteer work. An older gentleman approached me to try to help out a Vietnam veteran friend of his, and we just got Martha McSally's office involved in it. She's a local senator here, and we're trying to come up. She just got some legislation passed, and she's got her plate full because she's got re-election and stuff, but we're trying to get some stuff loaded up with her to start a Senate inquiry into some of the veteran issues that exist in Arizona. And we've helped actually rescue a couple different veterans. It sounds kind of weird to even say rescue, but we basically had helped a Vietnam veteran that was put to a facility that it just didn't belong in the facility. And once he gets in a situation like that, it's very hard to get him out of it. And so that's what's been occupying a lot of my time over the last couple of months here. But I'm getting ready to, as COVID starts to break loose, I'm going to get ready to go back to work and, get back to the gym and do the things, do some additional things, I should say.
Now, I know you had an extremely successful amateur wrestling career. How did you end up getting into MMA?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I moved out here in 1995, out here, Arizona, and the Sunkist kids were putting together a training camp leading up to the '96 Olympics. And so a lot of people from a lot of parts of the country came out here to train. And it was, oh gosh, man, it was me. It was all the locals, so like a guy named Melvin Douglas, Townsend Saunders. It was also going to be Kenny Monday. There's a lot of really good USA Wrestling guys that were out here. Zeke Jones, who's now the coach at ASU. And so I came out here, and it just so happens that the facility that we were practicing in also had a dojo. And there was a gentleman there named Richard Hamilton. And Richard Hamilton kept trying to say to us, hey, listen, if you don't make the Olympic team, I think that I can get you into this fighting stuff, this UFC stuff. And that's how it just started. And of that group, Dan Severn came out one time, and we talked to him, hey, how legit is this? And, stuff like that. And, since he was the first wrestler that was really in it and successful with it, we kind of said, okay, if he dances is okay, it's good. And then Mark Coleman ended up getting in it. And then when Mark went in it and I saw him do it, we're like, holy crap. Mark goes, dude, you got to do it. And that was the first Vale Tudo that I did in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And that was January 1997. And then from there, the rest of it kind of just fell out in front of me.
And there's a fan on here, John, that tipped you $5 and said, thanks for helping out us veterans. Having you guys care means a lot.
Oh man, it's the least I can do. The senator just passed. If you get an opportunity to look at what Martha McSally just passed, she just passed legislation here in Arizona. And I don't know if you're in Arizona or not, but she has $11 million that's set aside to work on veteran homelessness. And it just shouldn't exist. There isn't anybody that served in the military or in war or anything like that should be homeless. It should just be a rite of passage. You go to war, you're in the military, you got a house. It's not that big a deal. we're a pretty affluent country, and I think it's the least that we could do. So she set aside $11 million and some other stuff. So, it's the least I can do, man. I appreciate that, John.
And you mentioned Dan Severn and Mark Coleman. Were those a couple of the fighters that you looked up to getting into MMA?
Mark was 4 years older than me, and I think Dan's a little bit older than that. Mark, I ran into Mark when I wrestled. So I had an opportunity to compete against him, and I was a lot younger than he was. Both times I competed against him, he beat me. And then I did training camp leading up to the 1992 Olympics with Coleman, and that was kind of interesting because him and I were roommates, and it was interesting to say the least. But Mark is actually a really good guy, and I've been friends with him for a lot of years. So I looked up to him for a lot of different reasons. Not gifted with the most talent, but gifted with probably one of the hardest work ethics of anybody that I've ever seen. He just made up for where he lacked in talent through hard work.
How was Mark to spar with when you guys were training for fights?
Dude, he's a stump. He's hard to move. Like I've had opportunities to train with Brock Lesnar too, and Brock is like Mark plus 1.5. There's pictures of Brock when he's like 6'3", and he's, I'm going to say probably I've seen him 285 pounds with probably 7% body fat, for a big dude. That's just unheard of, and Brock is just a stump too. Him and Mark are just typical Midwest wrestlers, just great at fundamentals, hard to move him off position, and just really difficult to train with sometimes.
Did Brock bring you in to work with him during one of his training camps?
He, Brock was smart when he first got into MMA. Originally, when he was trying out for the Minnesota Vikings, and he was here, they had a facility that was really geared towards getting professional athletes either back on the field or getting them ready for like combines and stuff like that. And Brock had come out here when he ended his contract with the WWE, and he trained. And I just happened to run into him at a local MMA event that was here in Phoenix. And so we talked for a few, and I said, hey, listen, Brock, if you're ever interested in getting MMA, give me a call. At least I can point you in the right direction. And some time went by, and I got contacted by an attorney out of Minneapolis, and the attorney said, hey, Brock would like to talk to you. He put us together. Brock came down here. He trained with me for a little bit, and then we went down and trained with Don Fry for a little bit, just so Don Fry and myself could evaluate Brock to say, hey, dude, you're, physically you have the gifts, you have all the other skills that are required, because one thing MMA has shown is that you could be a big dude. It doesn't mean you can fight, So Brock came down here, we talked a little bit, and then he had me up to Minnesota for a little bit to help him set up his training facility. I was trying to get at least enough people around him and to spar with him a little bit. I was well past my prime to be able to spar with him like he needed. And it was interesting. I spent probably almost a month up in Minnesota with him.
Wow. Do you think you would have done all right against him in an actual professional fight if you guys had been matched up together?
Yeah, any of the wrestlers I think that I would do well against. It's just one of those things where it's like, I think like if Mark Coleman and I were matched up, or me and Brock Lesnar, or Brock Lesnar or Mark Coleman, I think for a lot of wrestlers, when you're at that level, that I think you could just flip a coin some days to see who's going to win. It's just, I think it would be that close. Because I know with Brock, there'd be a lot of wrestling, a lot of grinding. He's just a big, massive human being, and so, if you're not in great condition, he could wear you out in half a round, just how big and dominant he is physically. Mark, same way. Mark Coleman was a grinder, just a grinder, get on top of you and grind you into the ground. So any of those guys, I know that I'm just as good a wrestler, if not a better wrestler in some aspects. So flip a coin. I think that's the way most of that would be with either Brock, myself, or Coleman.
Did you happen to catch the heavyweight fight last night with Stipe?
I read some of it. I missed it last night. So obviously you watched it.
I've only seen the highlights. Yeah. But yeah, Stipe won by decision.
Yeah, he's a tough kid, man. Any of those Eastern European kids, man, are just tough kids, man. They really are. A friend of mine who's a photographer here, a guy named Tony Mandarich, had taken some pictures of him and stuff like that. And I know Coleman has helped him out before. And the guy's got talent, man. He's a tough kid.
We've heard that Daniel Cormier might go into professional wrestling now that he's retired. I know you did a small bit of pro wrestling. Mm-hmm. Do you think Cormier could do well if he crossed over?
Yeah, because I think that he would get the performance part of it. Obviously when you're fighting to win. So sometimes if you're doing a lot of ground and pound, it's not, people that appreciate the sport understand that that's a huge part of the sport. But people that don't understand the sport are looking at MMA, I'm talking about, and watch somebody do some ground and pound. They're like, oh, this is boring. But somebody that understands sport going, oh my God, look at the control on him. He won't let the dude up. Oh, look at him. He's just bound, And so I think Daniel would get the part where it's entertainment. When I did it, the guy's dead now. He's a Japanese guy named Hashimoto. And Hashimoto, when he struck out and did his own gig, it was fun. It was actually fun. And in Japanese pro wrestling, they lay it in as hard as you can imagine. I mean, they lay it in as hard as you can. And, it's almost up to to protect yourself, and I know American pro wrestling is a little bit different, how they lay it in and how they, do all their stuff. But in Japan, this is really funny. In Japan, they still really think like their pro wrestlers could get in the ring with a DC and fight with them and be, and it's, our pro wrestler guy's going to win. It's like, no, he would get the crap kicked out of him. So in Japan, they still hold on to that belief that their pro wrestlers are tough guys.
I heard that you got a massive payday for that pro wrestling match you did.
We're talking about the contract that I signed.
Yeah. That's when it cut out.
Yeah, the contract that I signed for somebody going from MMA over to professional wrestling, it just wasn't. You would end up with anywhere from probably a $5,000 to probably $7,500 a night guarantee, and they'd probably do, 5 to probably 8 fight guarantee, not fight, but performance guarantee, and it just happens where. Everything just kind of fell into place. It was actually really fun. It was really fun to do. And, if Hashimoto kept the event going more, I probably would have ended up renewing a contract. But, he ended up getting sick and then ended up dying of a heart attack, actually.
Did WWE ever make you an offer?
What's really funny? Rick brought me out to California to try to train me and a bunch of guys when he had his, what did he call that? He called it like university something, basically where you went out there and you trained in pro wrestling. He had those small little shows on the weekend where you kind of honed your skills, got your routine and stuff. So Rick had presented it. I had been to a couple different WWE shows and talked to Shane McMahon, and I talked to a couple of the other guys, and they're basically like, if you don't have your head screwed on straight, if you get in this and you don't have your head screwed on straight, the industry will just mow you down. You just be a number and a statistic, and that was basically it from everybody that I talked to. Is like, dude, if you're going to make the transition, you have to have things buttoned up. You need to be ready to work. They're on the road a ton. I think he said your first year you'd be on the road 300 days. I'd be like, oh my God, that's like a lot.
Yeah.
So it's and I didn't feel at the time that I could make that kind of commitment. So like anybody that's an A-type personality, if you don't think you can be the best at it, it's like, okay, I'm doing really good with fighting right now. I'm going to stick with that and see what course that runs. And if there's an opportunity for me to do pro wrestling in the future, I'll let that be.
You have a fan named Rodney here that tipped you $20. He says, thanks for your exciting performances in your prime. He asks, why did you keep fighting after the Tararov loss? Why didn't you retire then? Why did you leave the UFC and Pride after UFC 15?
Oh boy, that's a lot of unpacking there. So I should have retired. And there really isn't a good answer to why. I would have retired with a decent record in TAC. I would have been, I think it was like 12 or 13-3, and I would have retired and been fine. I think at that time when I had sat out long enough, it was a 2.5 year time frame where I sat out from that last fight. And the industry had grown a ton. So there was a lot of regional promoters that were offering just stupid money. I mean, my first fight back, I ended up fighting in the IFL, and they ended up paying me like $75,000. And I had been out of the ring for 2.5 years. And it was the same thing with a lot of the other promotions. To be honest with my fans and to be honest with myself, I have to actually say that, as a competitor, it sucked because I had to eat a lot of my pride just fighting for money. It's something I said I would never do. But, when you get to a point where it's like I had a young child and, my body was broken down and I still needed to make money. So a lot of the fights that I took that I should not have taken because the money was too tempting to turn down. So that much I regret. I mean, that's just being honest with myself and with my fans, that if I could take some of those fights back and rewind the clock, I would, but I can't, obviously. And, some of the other things, that's the first part. What's the second part?
Let me just go back to it for a second. The second part was, why did you leave the UFC for Pride after UFC 15?
Okay, so that was money as well. And it was money and opportunity. And I'll give you a long, short answer for it. So it was still owned by Bob Meyerowitz, and Bob Meyerowitz was not paying any money. It was only legal in 4 states. And you just couldn't make any money doing it. They were offering me, they went from $25,000 for the tournament fights to $50,000 for a single fight. And then Pride got involved, and Pride had offered me $145,000, and they offered for me to fight against Hoist Gracie. So it was opportunity and it was money. And then it's just kind of ironic, when the UFC was sold by Bob Meyerowitz to Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta, they had offered me one time they offered me a fight, and it was against Pete Williams, and I was still under contract with Pride. They offered to pay me $25,000 to fight Pete Williams. And at the time I was getting paid, 6 figures from the Japanese. And it was like, okay, I'm going to take a chance to fight for the UFC, to fight Pete Williams for nickels, or I can stay with Pride. So I just continue to fight with Pride.
When you were fighting with Pride, did you ever have much dealings with the Japanese Mafia? I know for wrestling, they sponsor a lot of wrestlers, and there's some stories from wrestlers about them.
Oh, it's pervasive. I mean, it's the guy that I dealt with was a guy named Mr. Ishizaka. Mr. Ishizaka was Korean. That was the name he used in Japan. His legal name was Kim Duck-Soo was his legal name, and it was there. Mr. Ishii was the guy that did K1, so it was Mr. Ishii and Mr. Ishizaka. It was all over the place. It really was. Nobody talked about it. The only time that it was really brought to a significant emphasis to me is when they had a K1 event in Las Vegas, and a gal named Yokino, who was a vice president of Dream Stage, which they were the operating arm of Pride, came to me, and I was not allowed to take any public pictures with Shishaka. I wasn't allowed to be at the same gaming tables with him. I wasn't allowed to participate on any level. I wasn't allowed to have dinner with him. I wasn't allowed to be seen with him. I wasn't allowed to do anything, because in Japan, I could actually do those things. I could go out to dinner with him. I can go out for entertainment. I could go out, and participate like that, because nobody would take a picture of him there. But if they had Japanese American reporters, I think that they were afraid that they would snap pictures, and it just would break into a scandal that didn't need to be.
You have a guy named Todd that tipped you $5. Thanks a lot, Todd. And a few fans were asking on here, you had such a huge neck in your prime. Is there anything specific you did for your neck routine to get that?
Oh man, you know what, we literally it was like sit-ups, right? So at the end of every practice, almost everybody in a gym you're going to watch in an MMA gym, they do sit-ups at the end of every practice. We would do two things. Like I did a ton of shrugs, because it just builds the base of your neck up. So once your traps get laid down at the base of your neck, you can build a bigger neck on top of it. And then it was just all the different necks. We would do a harness on our necks, and we do a lot of different things like that. Even some of the cable pull machines have a harness that you can put on, and you would do that. And then you do these exercises where you just do isometrics, and you'd actually have somebody pull down on your neck with a towel. And you do this and just fight it back and forth through a whole range of motions, side to side, side to side, side to side, back and forth, back and forth. A ton of isometrics. It was traps to build the base, and then you do some weighted stuff. And once your neck got started getting bigger, it's just one of those things that all of a sudden it's like I look in the mirror and it's like, holy crap, I got a 25.5-inch neck, So it was interesting, because it felt like I could just stiffen up my neck, and I could use it as a battering ram if I need to.
Now, what would you consider the toughest fight of your career to be? You've had a lot of tough fights over the years.
The first fights, just because of the uncertainty of them. Paul Varlin's, I had no idea what was going to happen in that fight as far as what he was capable of. Film study wasn't as big as it is now, because there's such a huge sample size of video that you can watch guys that you're going to fight against. And I knew nothing about Fabio Gugel. It was just said to me, hey, dude, listen, these Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys, they're like, they do stuff that you just can't pick up until you're caught in. And I was like, oh, that's great. So there's nothing I can study on film or anything. And they're like, nope. That was probably the toughest, is to get through those first series of fights. And then a guy that just for whatever reason I had tough competition with was Igor Volchanchin. Just typical Eastern European, just a grinder. Igor was the type of guy that literally you'd have to beat him to death to get him to quit. And you knew it was always going to be a tough fight. So that was probably one of my tougher ones.
Would you ever consider being an MMA coach with all your experience and knowledge?
Yeah. It's the two things. Like after this passed, my son, who's 15 years old, he wrestles for his high school here in Arizona, and his coach. I'll concede his coach is a full-time teacher, has a family, and then picks up coaching because it gives him a little extra spread of money during the year. And so after watching his coach and how there's no way to be kind about it, how just uneducated he was about wrestling and just the philosophy of it and how to teach kids, the fundamentals of wrestling and stuff like that. That last year, that got my blood boiling to the point where I'm like, I'll just apply for the wrestling coaching job. And then if I apply for the wrestling coaching job, well, the next succession of it is that I'll have some time, so I'll be able to actually get into MMA coaching. And, it's something I want to do. My body's healed up a little bit over the last year. And so I think that it's physically, I'm capable of doing something I wasn't able to do even 4 months ago, let alone, 5 years ago.
Todd tipped you another $5, and he has a follow-up question for your neck. How often did you actually work your neck?
Todd, I would do it, at the end of every other practice. So even if you're in the gym 5 days of the week, I would do neck 3 days of the week. In the first month you're going to do it, it sucks because there's nothing worse than when your neck is sore because it's muscles that you normally don't train. And when they get sore, sometimes it can be uncomfortable. And so that first month, you just be prepared to hey, I'm going to have to double up with my Motrin, or, I'm going to take a, hot compress, or have to rub, some kind of, hot and icy on my neck to make it feel better. So at least 3 out of, if you're doing 5 practices, at least 3 of the practices you're doing your neck. And like I said, once you start to build strength in it, then you can add different isometric drills in it. It got to a point where they couldn't hold a towel anymore for my neck, where I'd have to get a lighter training partner, but I'd have them hang on my neck, hang on the back of my neck. And I'd just do almost like you're doing pull-ups with a person on my neck. And obviously could be with someone like Rico or some of the bigger guys, because I wasn't capable of doing that. But having your training partner hold a towel when you're just moving the towel up and down and he's yanking down on it as hard as he can. So there's different ways to up the ante with using live partners, using different, you can use bands on it too. But some of that stuff I would at least do 3 days a week.
You mentioned Rico. Do you think he achieved his full potential as a fighter?
No. And I hate to say it because, I mean, you're a UFC champion. That's a world champion. That's a pretty high pinnacle. But I thought, me personally, I thought they could have beat Tim to defend it for his first defense. And I thought that he could have had just an incredible run, holding on to that belt for a long time. He's probably one of the most talented kids. He's got a great jiu-jitsu game. He's worked so hard and diligently on his hands. Talent-wise, I think he was one of the best talent guys. I know that his weight fluctuated through the years and stuff like that, but that hasn't been an issue in years and years and years. I think he could have had probably 5 or 6 or more title defenses for the belt.
And Phil tips you $5, and he says, did you ever fight anyone in the late 90s that you felt was stronger than you?
Ooh. I thought Daniel Bobish would be, just because of his build. He's just a big freaking dude, man. I mean, Bobish, when I look at him, I go, oh crap, this might be one of those things where you look at a power lifter, and a power lifter is not very defined muscular wise until you grab a hold of him, and he just has a dense pack of muscles. And I thought Bobish would be, and Bobish was strong. Just in some areas I was stronger, especially when I took him off his feet. He just wasn't as strong. I mean, most of the guys that lift heavy like he does are more linear strong, not angles and stuff like that. So Bobby should probably be the closest one.
And Rodney tips you $5, and he says, you mentioned you were offered a fight against Pete Williams by UFC. How do you think you would have fared against him if the fight happened?
Oh, I know Mark Coleman would have made for sure that I would have been ready for it. I think I would have done good against Pete. He was really good striking skills, had average ground skills. And at the time that I was fighting, when I was offered the fight, I still was just so heavy ground and pound that, anybody and you know what, in Pride, you weren't allowed to elbow. And in the UFC, you're allowed to elbow. So that would have been just a huge weapon that would open back up. And if you got me on top of somebody and gave me elbows, I just don't think they'd last very long.
Sammy Boy tips you $9.99 and says, "Who gave you the nickname of the Smashing Machine?"
I just went through this. So the Brazilians did. There is a article it's not Gracie magazine. It's called, I think, Autonomy, or, oh gosh, man, I'll have to actually pull it up for my sake, but it's, I believe, and I'm butchering this in Portuguese, but it's like Máquina de Bater, the machine that smashes. And so after I fought Fabio Gugel, and what I did with him over a 15 or, I forgot how long it was, 15 or 20-minute fight, they watched me take one of the guys that, I think at the time he might have been a 2 or 3-time Brazilian national champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and just manhandle him. And so, like, oh my God, the Máquina de Bater, the machine that smashes, the smashing machine.
And John wants to know if you ever amateur wrestled Kurt Angle.
Yeah, I actually amateur wrestled him for God. So Kurt was a heavyweight in college, even though that size-wise, Kurt is a little bit smaller than I am. And in college, I was bigger and cut down to 190 pounds. So in college, I never wrestled against Kurt, but I wrestled against him in 1992, 93, 94, 95. And so at one point, I was up where Kurt didn't beat me in those years. Kurt didn't beat me until 1995 when we wrestled and the Freestyle Nationals. We had tied at the Freestyle Nationals. I believe it was 2-2 or 1-1. And he beat me on passivity calls. And then 6 weeks after that, you have the World Team Trials. And I wrestled Kurt again there. And he beat me. You wrestle to make it as the number one guy for the world. You have to wrestle the best out of 3 matches. And so Kurt beat me 2 matches out of 3. And again, it was like 2-2. And 2-2 we tied. 1-1 we tied, but he beat me both times on passivity calls. So our record actually stands where I have 4 wins. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, I think we're 3-3. I think I beat him 3 times and he's beat me 3 times.
How would he have fared in an MMA fight against you?
Oh, I would have killed him. he just, the thing that Kurt is so fast. I mean, like, unbelievably quick. I mean, like when you're wrestling against him, there's a match that's coming up. Kurt has a documentary that's coming up, and in that documentary, there's a little bit about me and him and our competitions against each other. And so the 1994 Freestyle Nationals are anyways, we wrestled against each other. He wasn't big enough. He wasn't strong enough. And I was just a bigger, stronger 220-pound wrestler, so I can fend off his attacks. The number one counter for speed in wrestling is strength. And so I was just bigger and stronger. He can get in and attack me. He just couldn't finish it because he wasn't strong enough. And then in 1995, he got in. So in the years, he would end up fighting me at the early part of my MMA career. I was big. It was just, I would have destroyed him. Sorry, Kurt.
And you were portrayed in the movie Foxcatcher. Did you see that, and how did you think of the way they portrayed you?
It's interesting because I didn't come into I didn't come into Foxcatcher until basically almost the whole entire house of cards had fallen down. For the 1993 World Team Trials, John DuPont watched me wrestle, and he had some weird things, like he preferred wrestlers that were born in certain months. And I was a Sagittarius. He preferred Sagittarius wrestlers. It was just one of his little giddy ups. And so in 1993, I signed with Foxcatcher. And then 3 years later, in January, Dave is murdered by John. So I wasn't there for that long. It just was a weird giddy up, and everybody kind of just turned a blind eye towards it because, as wrestlers, we know that every dollar counts. So if someone's giving you $1,200 or $1,500 a month, that covers so much of what you need money for when you're trading. And I just think that portrayed things relatively accurate because there's enough people that were around that scene and had enough input and gave a clear enough perspective of really what was going on to give a pretty accurate portrayal of it. It's just interesting because I look back on it and I still get sad, about Dave. And he was my coach, and I didn't go to the funeral. I regret that a little bit, but John's estate was paying for the airfare to go to the funeral, and I felt weird about that. And I figured I would just skip it and mourn it my own way. So there's some stuff that I could have done better for me emotionally, and so it's history books will tell that story over again.
Double S tips you $5 and says, "Can you address the rumors that there were fixed fights in Pride?" I've spoke about this before, and I would be an idiot if I said there wasn't fixed fights in Pride. I would be a fool to think that there was that much Mafia presence around and there wasn't some kind of concessions that fighters had to make. I don't think that any fighter in their right mind would voluntarily go and seek out, hey, I want to throw the fight, or would you throw the fight for me? I think any of that went on was influenced by, some kind of angle the mob was, that had, certain, betting lines that they needed changed or whatever. I mean, there's so much nefarious things that would go on there culturally that I didn't understand. So I would say I'd be an idiot, like I said. But in order for me to say anybody had one fight fixed or not fixed and didn't fixed and all this, I don't know. Me personally, I never threw a fight. I had them come to me and kind of say it in a roundabout way, and I just had no interest in my integrity and my principles or anything that I was going to present to the public that I felt like, long-term wise, even if they gave me $250,000 and okay, I spend that, I still got my pride to deal with. I'm going to have my pride for the rest of my life. I'm going to have my integrity, so I thought that was more important to me than any kind of monetary compensation. Now, Rick Bassman has actually told this story to me on here about Mark Coleman taking the 60 grand for his dive in that one Pride fight. Were you surprised that Mark did that, or was it just a situation where it was good money for him, you think?
Oh, it wasn't money. It was opportunity. You know what they ended up doing? And I don't think Rick realizes this. They held Mark's participation in the Grand Prix event over his head if he didn't take what they were offering. So if you think about it, Mark had lost like 3 or 4 fights before the Takada fight. And the only way they were going to allow Mark to move forward was to say, hey, we're going to match you up with Takada. Good news. We'll get you into Pride. And bad news, you're going to lose. And I don't think if there would have been another way, I know that Mark would have took the other way. But if he didn't agree to, my understanding is that if he didn't agree to take a dive with Takada, that he would not have been allowed to participate in the Grand Prix, and that his fighting days would have been over. So you look at it from his perspective, father, two young kids, 2 young girls, and the UFC was closed to him at that point. And so the only thing that he has is he's got to try Pride. So I honestly can't fault him, and presented with similar circumstances, I can't say that I would have done any different. I know that he had a lot on his plate. I know he regrets it. I know it's a huge regret of his, and I think that he stated that publicly, that it's just something where I just know I've known Mark for 20, God, man, I've known him since 1992. I've known him for 30 years, and we come from the same general area in Ohio. It's just, I know that if there was a different way to do it, I know that he would have did it a different way, and I know he regrets it.
The RMM tips you $2 and says, how often do you lift these days? You still look great.
I'm just starting back. I just got the okay from my doctor to go forward with starting to at least get in the gym to kind of figure out what I can and can't do. I came down with neuropathy, which is in both my legs. Oh God, man, it's almost 4 years ago now. And I got treatments earlier in the year here locally from a doctor. American Physical Medicine is the name of his facility. And he treated me with stem cells. And it's actually worked surprisingly well. It's almost like if somebody's selling like an elixir. Drink this and you'll be, have a full head of hair and you'll be 7 foot tall in the morning. You think, oh my God, there's no way. And it's the same thing with stem cells, all the reading, all the research, everything that I've done on them. And the doc, Dr. Vin at American Physical Medicine, it's incredible, man. It really has. I've got a lot of a nerve regrowth in my feet and stuff. So I'm excited to get back in the gym once we get the okay from the governor here in Arizona. So hopefully I'll be back in the gym, look a little bit better.
Phil tips you $5 and says, were you ever close to fighting Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, or Don Fry?
It's interesting. Probably all 3 of them at one point. I know that Ken was a conversation topic with some of the matchmakers for Pride. Ken was looking for work at the time and kind of was stuck in no man's land where he was like, you're going to be a pro wrestler, you're going to get back to fighting. So I know Ken's name came up. Don Fry fought. Don Fry was another one that came up. And Dan Severn, it never really came up seriously because Dan was a little bit past. Dan was a little bit past his prime. I know Dan fought for a long time. And so the 2 serious ones were Ken and we're also going to be Don Fry.
We could do a whole podcast on your amateur wrestling career, but could you briefly sum up your career at Ohio State and winning the NCAAs?
So, oh gosh, man. So, you know what? So at Syracuse University, Devin. So sorry about that. Coleman's Ohio State. Kevin Randleman's Ohio State. I'm Syracuse.
Oh, sorry.
So I won a national.
I'm thinking
No,
of Mark
you're good.
Coleman.
Oh, 100%. So I'll pump the brakes here. Mark Coleman, his senior year in college was my freshman year in college. And on the way to winning his national championship, I wrestled Mark Coleman first round, first match of his run to an NCAA title. My senior year is when I won an NCAA championship. And the first, oh God, it was crazy because the first the first 3 years, I didn't even win a match at the NCAA tournament. It took me all the way to my senior year to put together a run mentally. It was all mental. It took me to my senior year. And once that barrier was broken, it opened up a whole new level of wrestling that I had never experienced. It was just like I could, tap into a part of my brain and just function on a subconscious level with wrestling. So my senior year, I ended up wrestling Randy Couture in the finals of the NCAA tournament. And I beat Randy 12-4. He had taken second 2 years in a row and Randy wrestled for Oklahoma State. So it's just kind of one of those ironic things that you tie Randy Couture, myself, Mark Coleman, and Kevin Randleman all together, which is a pretty interesting lot.
What do you think about Syracuse no longer having a wrestling program? I don't think they do anymore.
No, they don't. They don't. I think it's tragic. Like anybody that's heard me talk about wrestling, the thing that I like about wrestling is, all the individual stuff, obviously, it's imano, it's you against another person. It's more of your mind's dueling than it is your physical self. But very few sports offer the opportunity for some kid that's 115 pounds where you can compete at a world championship level or an Olympic level. And that's the beauty about wrestling, is it includes such a diverse bunch of kids. So there's no other sport. Ask a 115-pound kid if he wants to go out for the varsity football team. He'd tell you, hell no. And so that's the thing about wrestling, which I like. And for them to exclude it, it's just a matter of time before they start trying to go after all these smaller Division I sports to try to get them where they just don't exist. And it'll be a sad day when that happens.
Did you ever have any talk about fighting Tank Abbott over the years? He's done a few interviews with us on this channel.
Yeah, I don't think, again, it's one of those where I don't think it was that serious with Tank. But he would have been another good one. He's atypical early UFC participant where you just didn't know. It was like, hey, dude, I think he's tough. And you put him in there and he actually punches like a mule, and it's just kind of interesting because at the early days of the UFC, they just didn't know what was going to be successful in that ring.
There's a fan asking here if you ever saw any backstage fights at an MMA event.
With corners, I have, and with promoters and stuff, but with fighters, no, there might have been some mouthing off and stuff, but 9 out of 10 times, fighters are gonna settle into the ring and they were gonna leave it in the ring. There's still enough respect in the sport where, unless you're doing something stupid, where you're doing like a Conor McGregor and you're taking it to a level it should never be. Talking about someone's religion or family or stuff like that, that's when it can get ugly. But if you're just talking about the individual, I'm going to whip your ass, I'm tougher than you, I'm better, and ask for your mom, that's no big deal. But if you're taking it to a different level, in the back, you're going to get in a fight. When I was doing it, there weren't any Conor McGregors. I mean, there was just guys that were taking it in the ring, they were leaving it in the ring, and that was it.
Who punched the hardest of all the guys that you fought?
Oh, fuck. Oh, God, man. God, Volchansky punched hard. God, why can't I think of his name? I'll circle back to this question because I'm trying to think right now. Volchansky punched pretty hard. And there was, I'll circle back to the question.
I'll give you an easy question. How did this whole situation with The Rock come about where he is apparently going to tell your story in a movie and actually play the role of you?
Just strange. So I'll wind the clock back a lot of years. So I lived in Santa Monica for 3 years. When I was living there, The Rock started in MMA or started in pro wrestling in 1996. I started in MMA in 1997. So 2 years later, so 3 years later, I moved out to California. The Rock was still living there, and I happened to run into him like 1999 when he trained at Gold's Gym, and we just had brief conversation, and that's it. And then my documentary comes out a couple years later. He had the opportunity to look at the documentary, and I ran into him again at Venice, and him and I had a longer conversation, and he said, "Hey, do you want to grab lunch?" And I said, "Yeah." And so we go and we have lunch and we exchange numbers and stuff like that. And then life happens. And, he goes on to do his pro wrestling stuff, and I go on to do my MMA stuff and all these different aspects of it. So a lot of time goes by. And so this is from what he told me and what his agent told me. So recently, last year, he says he wakes up in the middle of the night and he has an idea, and he goes down on his computer. He pulls up the Smashing Machine movie. He watches that. He watches all these other things he can find on the internet. He wakes his manager up at like 4:00 in the morning, and he goes, "I found my next project. I want to put this together where I'm going to do a movie about Mark Kerr." And so at that point, this is last year, so I'm not really on social media a ton. He tracks down Brad Schlater, his agent, tracks down my ex-wife, Dawn. Dawn gets a hold of me. I call out to Brad, and Brad shares that story with me. Hey, he was in the middle of the night, sleeping, gets up, says, "This is what I want to do." And so Brad Schlater goes about acquiring all the rights. So I had originally sold the movie rights, and I had sold some other rights that are associated with the movie to a production company, and it ends up being where an Israeli gentleman, ended up buying my life rights and my movie rights and some other rights. I didn't know there were so many rights to a documentary, and so The Rock buys them all. And then him and I talked right before he made the announcement at Madison Square Garden. And, he basically said, "Hey, when we had spoke, years back, I wanted to do a project like this. And I didn't have any juice. I didn't have any pull." He goes, "Now I have the ability. I have pull. I can get this done." And so he goes, "Just hang tight. I'm going to make some announcements on Instagram, and we're going to put this thing together, and it'll be fantastic. You're going to have a blast doing it, and we'll bring you on as a consultant, and we'll just put this together to make it fun, and it'll be something that I think that the public will enjoy." And so it's just kind of one of those weird things where, him watching the documentary years and years and years ago, and having that kind of planted in his mind, it just popped in his mind again. He's like, "Oh shit, I can get this done." And probably one of the coolest, I know everybody says this, but probably one of the most gracious, coolest dudes. I mean, he had said to me, he goes, hey, Mark, I just want you to know this is an honor for me to do this, for me to take this on and put everything I have behind it to make it the best possible production and movie that I can. And it's just something that I really think that I can do a great job with. And, everybody involved, I think, will be happy with the product, at the end of the day. So, and obviously COVID hits and all this stuff hits. So, things are still moving forward. I think once COVID kind of breaks loose, they're going to make an announcement for the writer and the director. And once the writer and director, they'll have a distribution studio lined up for it. It's going to be fun moving forward. It's something that I didn't anticipate. I didn't, and part of what I've come to understand is that there's plenty other people in MMA that he could tell Conor McGregor's story, or he can tell, Mark Coleman's story, or Boss Rutan's story, or Kevin Randleman, or he can tell so many different stories of people. And he kind of looks at, what my life was, and it's the struggle that you go through. It's the different stuff that you go through as an individual. So it's really not about the wins, the losses, the championships, because there's been a ton of people that have won way more than I have and had a lot, more entertaining fights than I have. I think it comes down to him being able to tell a story that he believes will come across to as many people as, you deal with stuff. You have ups and you have downs. You have days where you get your dick knocked in the dirt, and you get back up and you do the best you can the next day. And, I think for whatever reason, a lot of that resonates with him. And, I think at this point, the success he has, I think he knows what resonates with the general public. And, he wouldn't take on something that he doesn't think that he can make the absolute best he possibly can. It's not his style. So I'm excited.
And I hope that one will benefit you financially as well. Did the Smashing Machine, I know it was a documentary, I assume you probably didn't make a fortune off of that one.
No. And part of what Brad had said to me, and also what The Rock had said, just simply, without much detail, in part, him taking this on is to benefit you financially, is to make a difference in where you are in your life and where your life can be moving forward. So, I know that it is part of why he's doing it. I know that, it just seems lately everything he touches just seems to do really, really well. So, it's incredible.
And for your best lifts in the gym, could you tell us, for instance, your squat, bench press, and deadlift?
Oh God, man. I didn't have that big of, my squat was, I just went through this with my son. I could squat just a little bit over 700 pounds. And that was being honest. That's being an honest squat. That's not, that's being legit, honest squat. My deadlift was my deadlift was a little bit more than that. My deadlift was probably I think I did 755 or 755, 705, 755, squat, deadlift, and
bench press.
Squat, deadlift, and bench.
Yeah.
My bench was 435, my best on that.
Okay.
So 435.
500.
No, you know what, man? Here's the whack part about it. I have long arms, right?
Yeah.
And that's a shit ton of distance to travel, man, to move 500 pounds. I even tried moving my grip way out, but once I got to a certain point, I just lost strength. So there's like the optimal grip on your bench where I not in too tight because that cuts my strength too, not out too far because that cuts my strength. Here's my optimal pushing range, but it still was a long distance to go to move any kind of weight. So It's something actually I wanted to, and I don't think it's in my future just to have a 500-pound bench. It's something I wanted to, but God, man, I had such strong legs. My legs were just legit, man. But I did squats. Go figure.
Yeah. Luke tipped you $9.99. He says he's been a fan of you since the Pride days, and he hopes you're doing well.
I appreciate that, buddy. And just, for everybody that's tuned into this, man, just thank Devin for reaching out. I appreciate it, man. I really do, because a lot of this is stuff I really like doing. I don't mind answering people's questions, fans' questions, not fans' questions, and I try to be as forthright and as honest as possible as I can. I got nothing to hide at this point. I mean, the gig's up, right? And so I just appreciate all the fans, and I'll be having some stuff coming up here, and some stuff released on Instagram, and I'm gonna start to get more active on it once this COVID stuff breaks loose. So I'm gonna try to get some lifting tips, like once a week I'll have like some lifting tips, and just smashing machine secret lifting stuff, or whatever it is, just stuff that I used to do. And stuff that I used to do wasn't that complicated. It wasn't that complex, because the simpler I kept my training, the less likely it was that I was going to get injured. So a lot of it's just basic stuff, man. But hopefully I'll be able to start doing something like that in the next couple of months. So some of the stuff you'll be able to post comments and questions on Instagram. I'll be able to answer it. For some, if I have enough time, I'll be able to do little videos where you'll be able to see some of the what I did, usually this and this and this. So hopefully, hang on. Hopefully it'll be in the next couple of months, okay?
What is your Instagram so people can look it up and add you?
Say that again?
What is your actual Instagram account under for people that want to find it on Instagram?
It's Mark Kerr TSM.
Okay.
So it's Mark Kerr, the Smashing Machine. And I got knocked out of here when this call came in. So just give me 1 second to plug back in. Okay. Shoot, I'm afraid. We're almost to the end here. So can you still hear me?
Yeah, we're wrapping up. I hope that we can actually have you back on again, though, maybe in a few weeks, and do this again, because there's a lot of questions, but I know you're a busy man.
Hey, Devin, I appreciate it, man. Thank everybody for coming on. I'll stay in touch. Stay in touch with me, kind of as this stuff, like I said, when this unfolds, man, you and I will spend time on it. Tips only is fine, stuff like that. I mean, appreciate everybody that tip. Believe it me or not, as stuff has come down with COVID, $5 sometimes makes a difference. So I appreciate everybody just reaching out and their questions. So there'll be another opportunity coming up in the next month.
Excellent. And the last thing I'll ask you about to close this off, we have the big fight between Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. coming up in November. Any prediction?
Oh, Tyson. I mean, Tyson still looks like a god, man. I mean, I've watched him train here in Phoenix in person, and just like I can't define or adequately describe the sound his punches make on a water punching bag. I can't describe it. It's the only kind of sound that when you hear it in person, you go, holy crap. Just like when you look, when you're at a ballpark and you hear somebody hit a baseball with a wooden bat out of the ballpark, there's no other sound like that. So it's incredible. I mean, I would take Tyson day in, day out, month in, month out. I just hope he doesn't kill Roy Jones.
I actually almost fought Roy Jones a few years ago, but the Arizona Boxing Commission wouldn't sanction it. He had an open challenge. I wanted to have it, whether I would win or not, but they wouldn't.
That would have been great. That would have been fantastic, man. Oh my God.
So do you have anything you want to close up with? I know you got to get going, but any final comments for the fans here?
No, just again, man, I really appreciate you guys. I do. And I don't do this often enough. And it's something I'm going to start doing more and more and more.
I just want everybody to know how much I appreciate their questions, and I appreciate them being my fans through the years. It does mean a lot, man. It's a crowded place with how many, fighters are out there now. So I appreciate everyone for still being a fan. Thank you.